Someone asked me recently, what do I do all day? And the way they asked it, that particular pause before all day, and that little tilt of the head, I knew it wasn't really a question. And then I started to explain myself. I listed things. I mentioned my Etsy shop and my children's books. I brought up this YouTube channel, and I basically assembled a little case for why my days were worth something. And then I stopped. I thought, why am I doing this? I'm not on trial. Hi, I'm Michelle, and on this channel we talk about creating a peaceful, confident life after 50, especially if you're living alone, traveling solo, or navigating retirement. Here's the thing about retiring, especially retiring early, and especially without a traditional nest egg, or when you're doing it alone. People have opinions. And some of those opinions come out as genuine curiosity. Some come out as concern. And some come out as something that sounds a lot like, but what do you actually do? We've been living inside a culture that decided your worth is your productivity, and your value is your output, and your identity is your job title. And that belief runs so deep that when you step out of it, when you leave a career, simplify your life, stop chasing the metrics, the people still inside that system can't quite make sense of you. It's not always malicious. A lot of the time it's genuinely reflexive. When they ask, what do you do? It's because that's how we've all been trained to place each other. It's the opening line of the script we've been handed. But after 50, especially if you've built a life that looks different from the conventional playbook, renting instead of owning, traveling alone, living small and intentionally, you start to get a specific flavor of that question. One that's really asking, was your choice the right choice? When someone pushes back on your retirement, it's almost never actually about you. It's about them. Because your exit can feel, to someone still grinding, like a quiet comment on their choice. Like you looked at the treadmill and said, no thanks, and now they're standing on the treadmill wondering if they should have said no too. That's not your problem to manage, but it does explain the energy behind a lot of those questions. When I was newly retired, I had made an intentional, deliberate choice, kept my overhead low, structured my income streams in a way that gave me real flexibility. I knew my numbers. I wasn't being reckless, but I hadn't quite gotten my footing yet, socially. And every time I was around people who were still working, people I'd known for years, I'd feel this subtle pressure to account for myself, to prove the value of my days, to demonstrate that I wasn't just sitting there. So I'd over-explain, I'd pre-justify, I'd bring up the Etsy shop before anyone asked, as if I needed to show proof of productivity just to belong in the conversation. So how do you stop explaining yourself without becoming defensive, cold, or weird about it? Here's what worked for me. The first thing is to notice the justification loop. The justification loop is when you explain your choices, the person pushes back, you explain more, and then the more you explain, the more legitimacy you accidentally hand to the premise, which is that your life requires a defense. Every time you elaborate, you're implicitly agreeing that there's something here that needs justifying. So the first move is to stop elaborating. I'm retired and I love it. You don't have to attach a list of activities to prove the retirement is being used correctly. The second thing is to get honest about who you're actually explaining yourself to, because some of those conversations are happening with other people, but a lot of them are happening inside your own head. The voice that says you should be doing more, or this doesn't count, or what are you even contributing? That voice isn't coming from your neighbor or your old colleague. It's coming from 40 years of internalized productivity culture. And you have to decide consciously that you're done letting it run the show. For me, that meant paying attention to how I described my days to myself, not just to other people. When I take my dog for walks in the morning and I'm just present, not rushing, watching him sniff every inch of the sidewalk, I used to have a small background thought that said, this isn't enough. And I had to actively replace that with something true, which is, this is exactly what I retired for. Third, find your people. There is something incredibly rewarding about spending time with other women who have opted out of the status game. Not people who are bitter about work or bragging about how little they do, but women who have built intentional, creative, peaceful lives and who don't need you to explain why yours looks the way it does. When I'm with those women, nobody asks what I do all day. We talk about what we're making, where we went, what we're reading, and what's growing. The whole premise of the conversation is different. And fourth, this is the one that took me the longest. Let your life be the answer, not in a performance way, not in a look how happy I am, see kind of way, but genuinely when you build a life that feels right for you, a life with real peace in it, with good mornings, creative work, and actual friendships, you stop needing external validation for it. Not because you've convinced yourself it's enough, but because it is enough. And you can feel that. I thought stepping out of the justification loop would feel like giving up, like I was just going to let people think what they wanted and quietly stew about it. But that's not what happened. What happened was that I felt lighter, because when you stop trying to convince people, you stop needing them to agree with you. And when you stop needing them to agree with you, their skepticism loses its grip. The person who looks at my apartment and my secondhand furniture and my old used car thinks she has nothing to show for it. Their opinion just doesn't have the same charge anymore. Because I'm not in their value system. I opted out. The more settled I got in my own choices, the more conversations around me shifted. Not because people changed, but because I stopped bringing the apologetic energy that invites the skeptical questions in the first place. If you're still in the early days of retirement, especially if you retired suddenly under difficult circumstances, the internal unsettledness is real and legitimate. That's the disorientation phase that almost every retiree moves through. Just stop explaining yourself is advice for someone who already found their footing. If you're still looking for it, give yourself some grace. And if you genuinely haven't figured out what your days are for yet, if the quiet feels more empty than peaceful, then the work isn't really about what to say to other people. It's about going back to the internal stuff. What do I actually want? What fills me up? And what is this time for? The external noise matters a lot less once you've answered those questions for yourself. There's a link below to my workbook, Design the Retirement You Actually Want, if you need help figuring out this phase of life. Just remember, you don't owe anyone a justification for your retirement, not for how you funded it, not for how modest it looks from the outside, and not for how you spend your days. What people are actually measuring when they ask those questions is their own fear, the fear that there isn't a life waiting for them outside of their job title. The most radical thing you can do in a culture that worships busyness is to live quietly, intentionally, and without apology. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt this, that pressure to justify your retirement to prove your days are worth something? Thank you so much for watching.